The next and the final step in the method is to develop the trade-off analysis matrix. The template for the trade-off analysis matrix is shown here. In the leftmost column, C and C indicates criteria and constraints, which can be taken from step 2. The next column rates the severity of these requirements. Severity is how important each constraints and criteria are relative to each other. We will discuss this in detail in the next slide. In the next column, copy the information about different tests from step 2. The rows below the test column is provided to compute the cost, lead time for each time, and the performance indicator. Finally, on the extreme right hand side column, verification complexity index is calculated. This index tells us how complex is a requirement to be verified. VCI is ranked based on their values, which helps us to prioritize the tests. Let's compute the VCI and the performance indicator in this slide. Performance indicator is the product of cost per test and lead time per test. It is called so because the two parameters that affects the performance of the company are cost and product delivery lead time. So that is why it is called as performance indicator. Now, severity of the requirements are rated based on its relative importance with other requirements. A 139 rating system is used where 1 indicates low importance, 3 indicates medium importance, and 9 indicates the highest importance. And everything is relative to each other. What you do is you list all your constraints and criteria, pick up which is the most important, and with respect to that, rate the other requirements. Hence, students are suggested to use a separate worksheet to identify the severity, and then you can directly copy that information into this table. The requirements and the test are mapped to each other. For instance, the test T1 is used to partially verify the constraint ID number 1. But what you see there is a number 5. What does that mean? It is the number of times you repeat the test. Normally, tests are repeated more than once to check for consistency in the data. So therefore, the number which you enter there should indicate how many number of times you repeat the test. Now, reading along the column T1, the cost per test is documented. This is also measured in 139 rating scale, where 1 indicates low cost, 3 indicates medium cost, and 9 indicates high cost. And in the next row of the same column, the time taken to conduct the test is also recorded. Even in this case, we are following the 139 rating scale, where 1 indicates short time and 9 indicates the longest time. But short and long are quite subjective, isn't it? Say your project lead time itself is 45 days. And one of the tests takes the longest, that is 15 days. Then I would rate this test as 9 and rate the other tests relative to this. So once I have this information, then I can go ahead and calculate the performance indicator, which is the product of cost per test and lead time per test. And the next, we will calculate the verification complexity index. It is calculated by multiplying the severity of the constraints and criteria with the number of times a participating test is conducted multiplied by its corresponding performance indicator. If you look into the numbers, I have taken 9, which is the severity of the constraint 1, and then multiplied with the number of times the test is repeated. And again I multiply that with the performance indicator. That is why I get 9 times 5 times 9. Then I sum with the other participating test. In this case T4 is participating. So it is 2 times 9. So overall my VCI will be 9 times 5 times 9 plus 2 times 9. So this is how we calculate VCI. Once we calculate VCI for all the constraints here, then we can go ahead and rate this VCI, which we will use it for prioritizing the test. An entire trade-off analysis matrix is shown in the next slide. What I have here is a completed trade-off analysis matrix. Now, looking into the VCI, the maximum complexity to verify a requirement is for the first constraint, that is the first requirement. This means that I have to focus my resources for all the party tests, that is T5 and T4. Now, looking into test T1 and T4, which one should I focus first? In order to do this, multiply the number of tests of that row and performance indicator, and then prioritize based on the resulting number. In this case, multiply T1's number of tests with the performance indicator gives me a number of 45, that is 5 times 9. Whereas if I do the same thing for test T4, it gives me a number 18. At this point, test T1 is the first priority while T4 is the second priority. But we need not make a conclusion at this point because it might change once you go through all the requirements and the trade-off analysis. Now, the next requirement that is of high complexity is the fifth requirement, that is CNC number 5. Since there is one participating test, that is T3, my next priority is T3. If you take a look at the VCI, there is a tie for the third and fourth requirement, isn't it? In certain cases, such situation can be resolved by looking into the severity number. Whereas in this example, we do not have that opportunity. But because both of these requirements have the same participating test and it is repeated the number of times, there is a potential opportunity to group test T4 and push up the order in the priority list. We are not stopping here. Let's look into the requirement number 2 here. It provides another opportunity for grouping. If you look into second requirement, there are two tests, T2 and T4, whereas T2 is having a low performance indicator, whereas T4 is having a high performance indicator. Because T4 is another participating test which is common to all other requirements, we can group T4 with all other tests. So therefore, I have 8 tests grouped together. Now how to number it, how to reorder it? So because you have 8 tests with performance indicator as 9 for 4, it gives me a value of 72. But now I compare this value of 72 with test T1, where I had 5 times 9, that is 45. It's obviously less than T4. So my first priority of the test is T4, followed by T1, and the third is T3, and the fourth is T2. So by this matrix helps us to prioritize our tests and also to do trade-off analysis, like where I can combine and where I can eliminate. In this example, we did not have an opportunity to eliminate. Maybe in your case, we might have an opportunity to eliminate. For example, say constraint 2 is verified with a test T2. That test might be a simple friction test. So you need not repeat the friction test because we have all standard values like steel on steel, steel on plastic. So we can pull the information directly from the literature and say we are eliminating this test. So it also provides us an opportunity to think of eliminating and not only think of grouping it. So that is the advantage of this trade-off analysis. But in case if you are eliminating any of the tests from this matrix, you have to go back to DVP matrix and then write it in the remark why you have eliminated it. So these are the 4 steps in our planning method, And now a quick recap of all the important points. Now prepare this DVP after sign off of the constraints and criteria list with the agreement of advisor or the customer. And complete the DVP matrix after conducting test. It's normal for you to prepare the DVP, but after you conduct the test, you should go back and then enter into the pass or fail column and also enter additional information in the remarks column. Now, if tests are eliminated based on prior literature, please include it in the remarks column of the DVP matrix because it is very essential. And finally, revisit the DVP matrix whenever constraints and criteria is changed after sign-off. This is a very important step because as you move along in the design, the requirements keep evolving and the requirements may change. So once there is a change in the requirement, you may have to go back to the DVP matrix, look if the acceptance criteria, test measures, everything holds good. And if it's good, you can leave it as such, and if it's not, you go ahead and modify it and make sure the response person is informed. After you are done with all your reports, please attach these matrices as appendices in your report and finish. So these are the key essential points which you may have to remember, and if you follow these 4 steps, then it is possible for us to have a successful product verification. Thank you for listening to me patiently about this verification planning method. I'm sure you will have some questions. If you have some questions, please either direct it to Dr. Joshua D. Summers or write an email to me, that is Prabhu Shankar, and my email ID is pshankar@clemson.edu.